Your fear of conflict and confrontation is going to hold you back from growth. It's going to hold you back from having healthy relationships because you're afraid of a negative outcome. So we're going to talk about that today because you got to be able to accept conflict and confrontation. Check it out. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positivity Experience. It's your girl, Lori, and it is spring, and spring is springing. And if you're in the U.S. and you're listening to this somewhat when it comes out, it is Memorial Day weekend. So yeah, it is the official start of summer. And to celebrate that, I am sitting outside in my backyard, which you can see on my YouTube, because this does go up to YouTube. And I figured this is such a great place to kind of talk to you about conflict and confrontation. And this is a huge part. And this is something that I see with my clients on a regular basis. It's something that I had a gajillion years ago. I don't have that issue now. And I'm going to talk to you kind of how you can work through that. Over on Patreon, there is going to be an amazing worksheet that's going to help you identify sort of the deeper roots and give you some guidance on how you can start basically walking into those conflicts and confrontations, because until you do, you're pretty much going to stay the same and you're going to breed a lot of resentments. So if that's your jam, jump over to Patreon, patreon.com/the positivity experience. So I want to talk to you about it because so many times you are in a situation and you say, I've set a boundary, or I'm afraid to set a boundary. You're afraid of the confrontation. So I see this a lot when people go, well, like I want to set a boundary. I do set a boundary, but then people don't adhere to the boundary because you're not really setting a boundary. Okay. So you can go back to the boundary podcast, but I'll cover that briefly here. Is a boundary is not a boundary without a consequence. Okay. This is so important. So sometimes when you're avoiding the conflict or confrontation, you go, hey, listen, you know what? I understand that you were going through something, but I really don't like when you talk to me that way. That is not a boundary. That is not a boundary. And that's very eggshelly and non-confrontational. In that same situation, and I've used this before, it would be something similar like, hey, you know what? I don't allow myself to be spoken to that way. And if that continues, I'm going to rethink this entire relationship. See, you have to be able to walk into it. You got to confront it, because so many times people, especially if they've been allowed to in the past, if you've allowed them in the past to say, oh my God, they're just going through something. Oh, they're having a day. And they're like, yeah, okay, sure. And then 3 days later, they're coming back and doing whatever it is that quote unquote boundary is that you set. And you're like, I don't understand, because you've created a system for them or anybody else to not confront it. So that's why a lot of times in boundaries, you have, you say you set boundaries and then you say people overstep them. No, they didn't. No, they did not. People can only attempt to overstep them. If you have no consequence in play and they can't read your mind, and you haven't said, if this, then this, if this happens, then this happens, and then stick to it. Just because you say it in their words, you don't go into the reminding, hey, listen, I just wanted to remind you that I said, if you talk to me that way, that's not a boundary. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of touch that because I have so many things on boundaries and ego. That's a big, huge platform of mine. So I have so many things on my YouTube and in other places that you can actually look at. So that might be very beneficial to you. So I want to talk to you about various reasons, right? And the fear of conflict is rooted in various psychological principles. This is rooted in psychology, maintaining some form of social harmony. You want to maintain harmony because we as humans, we don't intentionally really like conflict. Now, you may have people in your life that you're like, oh my God, all they do is have conflict. All they do is confront. Always remember that goes into deflection and that goes into heavy insecurity. There is a super high level of insecurity when you find the people who are always in defense mode. If they're deflecting, if they're in blame game, all of these things are deflection of having to kind of own their own stuff. So when you confront them or you bring something to their attention, which they consider as confrontation, it's going to trigger something in them that goes, no way. And that is one of those that I'm going to talk to you about when it comes down to what the avoidance and conflict leads to and actually why they do it. So one of the first things is the fear of a negative consequence, fear of a negative outcome. I need you to be so clear in this and really just, you're going to have to radically accept this. There will be people who are not going to like what you have to say. There will be conflict that is going to create a negative outcome. Just get that now. Okay. You keep wanting it to play nice and you want to be polite and you don't. I love that you're being kind, but you're sacrificing yourself in it. There will be, not might, there will be negative consequences and outcomes, but not always. So if you're worrying about, well, is it going to be a negative? It doesn't matter. It really does not matter. What matters is that you're able to articulate it and you're able to also listen to their side. Because sometimes when you have conflict, you're like, okay, I'm just emotional now because I haven't brought it up in the last 6 months. It's creating high levels of resentment. You're so angry. Meanwhile, the person has no idea on the level in which you're angry. So you're afraid of a negative outcome. You're afraid of retaliation. You're afraid of emotional distress. And then what happens is, and this creates a problem in so many areas of your life, not just in conflict, anticipation. You are anticipating, if I do this, this is going to happen. Use that in real life, not just in conflict. Oh my God, well, what if I do this and it doesn't work out? So now you're anticipating something. So the anticipation is never a level of preparation. See, you think that you're preparing yourself. Okay, listen, if I talk to this person and then they say this, then I can say this. Now you're writing a script and now you're playing the role of the other person. Well, I've seen the other person in action. Okay, cool, fine. But if you have something that you need to say because it's something that you need to address, let's think of something in real time while I'm talking to you. It's not something that I kind of wrote down. Is somebody at work. Okay, let's say somebody at work, you just spent, 3 days doing this presentation and the boss said to this other person, hey, can you just look over their presentation? Fine, no big deal. Kind of need different eyes on it. And then you present it. And at the end, the boss is like, oh my God, this was a great presentation. And that person says, well, thank you. Yeah, I had to brush up. I had to change a lot of it from what they did. So I really tried to polish it up. So, oh my God, thank you. And you're like, you didn't do all of this work. So number one, part of this is ego. Okay, part of this is like, hey, stop taking credit for my stuff. So part of that is ego. Part of that is insecurity. Part of that is needing to be valued. Listen, I understand it. However, it's how you're going to address it. So if you're going to go back and you're going to tell John by the water cooler and Mandy in the lunchroom and all of these people how mad you are because Miranda took credit for your work, you're not confronting anything. Now you're just running around somewhat smearing somebody, whether you feel as though it's valid or not. You don't want to do that. That's not confrontation. That's avoidance. The fear of conflict is avoidance. That's literally all that it is. So especially if you have avoidant attachment, this is going to become a normal part of your communication. That doesn't mean that it's right. So what you would do in that situation is you can say, hey, Miranda, afterwards, hey, Miranda, do you have a second? Yeah, I got a second. Now, wait, don't do it out of emotion because that's the other thing. You can't go into conflict and confrontation emotional. You can't go in there angry. You can't go in there ready to talk about what they did, and you have to use I statements. Hey, you know what? I felt a little disrespected because I'm the one that did a lot of the legwork, and you kind of like shit on it a little bit, and I appreciate what you kind of polished up for me. I really do. But I think that we need to address this with the boss because now there's a different viewpoint on my skill set. Now, here's the deal. You are in no control how she responds. It could be like, well, I don't care. Like, I don't give a damn. I'm not saying anything to him. Yeah, that could happen. Or, oh my gosh, you know what? I didn't even realize that I did that. But if you're going into it and you're anticipating on how it's going to be and what you're going to say, it's going to be a problem. So don't sit there and plan and go, okay, well, if she says this and she says this and she says this, well, then I'm going to say this. See, you can't do that. And you also don't want to avoid it because now it's going to breed resentments. Heavy resentments. Now, every time you see her, you're not going to trust her. Every time you see this girl talking to Miranda, you think, oh, Miranda's going to screw this person over. You're creating unnecessary drama for yourself. So that fear of a negative outcome goes a lot into people pleasing, a lot into insecurity, a lot into attachment, a lot into past experiences. But if you're not willing to go into it to speak your piece from a non-emotional but a very articulate way and hearing them, then you're always going to stay in this loop. So accept that there may be a negative outcome, but you're going to be able to at least get what you need to say there. And if it doesn't work out and you need to go to a higher level, then you do that too. But that's in any area. So your fear of a negative outcome, and you can always create one, by the way. So if you're automatically a pessimistic thinker, you will automatically create a negative outcome in your head, with or without that ever happening. So what do? You're like, I don't feel like dealing with that. It's too much work. Now you don't do it. And now it's breeding up resentments. It's stagnation of your personal growth. You start making poor decisions. There's a reduce in your creativity. There's emotional stress. That's headache and physical headache, stomach ache, nausea. Like all of these things can come into play when you're sitting in a fear of a negative outcome. And that's in any part of your life. There may, and you just are going to have to radically accept that. Now, number 2 is social conditioning. Social conditioning can play a big part of this, right? So you say, okay, the idea that maintaining a harmony in all relationships, avoiding conflict as some level of a virtue, like, you know what, I'm being very polite. I'm just not going to deal with it because I want to maintain this harmony in this relationship. There is no harmony in the relationship. See, now you're saying, well, this relationship is going really well and I don't really want to mess that up. Well, if you having a confrontation or a communication with somebody and it creates a problem in the relationship, then let it be a problem. Then maybe you don't have as much harmony in that relationship as you think it is. Maybe that relationship isn't nearly as strong. And that goes into the idealization of how you think it should be, how you want it to be. Well, you know what? I have this great relationship because now everything's amazing. I have this great relationship and I really don't want to lose that person. Attachment. I really don't want to lose that person. So you know what? I just want to keep peace and harmony. Okay. You're not keeping peace and harmony because you're walking around here stressed out. And every time you're with that person, you're still annoyed by something. They have zero idea what you're annoyed with. You're upset because they're not addressing it. And they don't even know what there is to address because you never created that conversation. And if in fact they say, you know what, I understand that, I hear you, but I'm not interested in being your friend, then that is what it is. But the idea that you cannot have conflict because it is virtuous or it is being polite, that is a false narrative. That's a false narrative. Typically, it's because people didn't want to deal with conflict. So they're letting you know, hey, listen, I'm not interested in conflict right now. So if you give me conflict, it's rude. Well, you know what? People are going to see conflict as rude. They're going to see confidence as arrogance. There's absolutely nothing that you can do about it. And that goes into that, the very next one, which is low self-esteem, lack of confidence. And that's what it is. It's low self-efficacy. That's essentially the other word for lack of confidence. If you doubt your ability to handle conflict, you have to realize that is a level of that is not a level. It is a lack of confidence. And it's a huge piece of this. Your fear of conflict goes into your fear of understanding that you're going to be able to respond one way or another. Even if it's like, you know what? I need a minute. I hear what you're saying. I do not have it in me to answer this right now. Give me 20 minutes or I'm going to talk to you tomorrow. It's okay to not address it in that moment if you're in an emotional space. Go back and listen to the podcast on reactions versus response, because to respond to something versus to react to something is a very different thing. To have a response, you're able to articulate it in a non-elevated, non-emotional perspective. A reaction is exactly what that is. It is instant. There's no filter. It goes, this is what I have to say, and it goes right out. No filter. And that's a reaction. And then what happens is you try to justify that. Yeah, but they did this. Okay, you're still in emotions. And when people react, no one's listening to you. No one's going to listen. They might not even listen to you in response, but they're more entitled. They are more likely to listen to you when you're not in a reactive state. And this goes into emotional maturity. This goes into emotional regulation. And while there are reasons, especially in neurodivergence, of why the emotional regulation can be harder, that doesn't mean it's impossible. So you have to say, where do I need to heal? Do I find myself being reactive to everything? Somebody says something like, oh, wow, I really like that paragraph. I mean, I probably would have added more. Well, I mean, I did the best I could. Whoa. So now you can't even take criticism. So if you can't take criticism, you're not going to be able to take conflict, and you're going to avoid conflict at all costs. Because if you're not willing to take that feedback, now you can do without whatever you want, but if you're not willing to take it, it's going to be problematic. Now, if you have this belief system that by avoiding it, it helps you, I'm going to unbox that right now. It absolutely does not. Avoiding having and next week is going to be good because it's about knowing when to end relationships and how to get, and like when you know it's time to get out of it. And this is going to be a part of it, is when you avoid getting out of relationships or getting out of situations for the fear of not having it. Again, attachment, that's anxious attachment, low self-esteem. We know, like, you're going to notice that low self-esteem, lack of confidence, lack of emotional maturity, all of those things are going to go pretty hand in hand with everything I talk about and everything anybody else with a personal development podcast is going to talk about. It's not just me. There's 5 ways, about 5 or 6 ways in which you can improve yourself. That's it. So there's going to be a bunch of us talking about it in same ways, but different delivery. But the reality is as you start to work on your self-confidence and you start accepting that it's okay for you to have that confrontation, well, now a lot of these other things come into play. Because a lot of times you'll stay in jobs, you'll stay in a family like you're an adult child because you would rather have that person, and then you haven't healed your attachment. So then in that attachment, you're told all of these things. This is why it goes on and on and on when it comes to you. And it is your responsibility. It doesn't matter how you got here. Does not matter how you got here. Myself and you, none of us are really here because we had some, I don't know, perfect, it doesn't exist, childhood coming up. I'm not saying this to you because I had a perfect childhood. You're definitely not listening to it because you did. And so that goes into, if you want something to change, you have to change it. So if you're like, well, I want to be able to talk to someone, there's no time. There's no such thing as like, okay, let me get ready. Let me feel like I'm ready. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going into confrontation. That doesn't exist. You're going to have to do it uncomfortable. You're going to have to do it even though you don't feel like doing it. That is how you're going to get into the confidence. And that's with anything. Exposure. Even if you freeze for a minute, just say, okay, like you wait till that interaction is over and you say, oh my God, okay, why was I freezing? Because I didn't really know what to say. Okay, so now we dig deeper. You can always book a session with me. You know that. Now we dig deeper as to why you feel that you had to freeze. Like, it could be a learned behavior, but what are you fearing? Are you fearing rejection? Because guess what? That may happen. They're not really rejecting you, though. You look at it as rejection. Sometimes people go, okay, well, I can't deal with this and I'm out. That doesn't mean that they're rejecting you, but you have that fear of rejection. You have this sense of like, oh my God, I'm no good because of that. Now we're going into the anxious attachment. We're going into insecurity again. So that's why I said you can see the pattern. So unless you're willing to understand that between the social conditioning of be polite, do as I say, not as I do, don't question me. These are all things that we've sometimes heard growing up. Don't question me. Just stop questioning me about things. Wait, why? Like, no, you can question. Just be careful of the delivery, right? In general, I tell everybody this, and this is going to go into emotional, okay? And that maturity, social maturity, emotional intelligence, emotional regulation, all of this is going to come into play where you're able to look at it with different lenses and just go, okay, well, I'm going to have this conversation and it is what it is. And the key to all of this is using I statements, not just in conflict, in anything. I feel, not you made me feel, you do these things, you. That is never going to serve your purpose. That is not doing a confrontation. That's you being aggressive in a passive way to try to get your point across so they can then take some accountability for hurting your feelings. And now this is the outcome in which you seek. It's not going to happen that way. You're just going to have to understand that, because if not, you will stay in this loop. Now, number 4, This is interesting. And this is probably one of my favorite ones, honestly, because I talk a lot about ego. That's my specialty, as well as manipulation, another part of my specialty. And this is important because number 4, sometimes your reason for avoiding conflict is manipulation and control. I'm not saying you're sitting in a corner, wringing your hands together, talking about, I'm going to be manipulative. No, this could also be a learned behavior, right? But when you're manipulative, it can be a form, well, manipulation is a fictitious way of having a control, and you're not going to have control over it. But when you manipulate, you're manipulating it because you want to make sure that you are defending your ego. You are defending your ego. You are saying that if I do this, I'm going to make them feel bad. I'm going to make them feel bad, and then they're going to come and apologize to me. So this is your passive aggressive way of manipulating a situation. I've used this example before. If you have somebody come over every Sunday and they help you weed in the garden, okay? And they feel some kind of way, you have no idea what it is, and they haven't confronted you, and now they go, I'm not coming over on Sunday. Okay, well, first of all, that's manipulation, right? Grow up. Like there's and I say grow up with a valid reason. I had to grow up, and growing up is in emotional maturity, right? Is emotional maturity. Emotional immaturity is still living in that kid state, is still living in that inner brat. Go back and listen to the inner brat. If you're on Patreon, print that inner brat worksheet out and focus there, because your inner brat and your lack of growing up is creating this level of manipulation. So then you say, I'm not going to come and weed that garden. And they're like, okay. So then they have Sally come over and weed the garden. Now you're mad because they didn't say to you, oh, well, why didn't you come over? Oh, what can I do? They just were like, okay, it is what it is. And they went and they got somebody else. And it didn't work as you wanted it to. Now your ego is bruised. Now you're upset. Now you're so mad, you're not just telling them, you're going around telling everybody, can you believe her? If you're walking around and you are trying to smear someone by talking to this person and this person and this person and this person to try to get them to side with you, that is manipulation. Manipulation and control. And that's so damn important, because when you get that, you're able to understand, why am I trying to manipulate it? What is it that I'm fearing in acceptance that this person may or may not be in my life forever? Well, there's no such thing as forever that way anyway. So check yourself the next time you're doing that and say, okay, well, if I'm avoiding something and I'm not going to have a conversation and maybe I'm withholding something, passive aggression, that's control. Why am I doing that? Why don't I just address the situation? Because I'm not sure how they're going to take it. Goes back to the first one, fear of a negative outcome. This is why they all go hand in hand. This is why we know that it's rooted in psychology. We know that it's rooted in low self-esteem. We know that it's rooted in lack of confidence. We know that it's rooted in social conditioning, all of those things. And number 5 is self-identity. This goes hand in hand with the ego. So if you are afraid of confrontation, and let's say the person, I don't know, wants to say something about their viewpoint, but you are worried about your image. You're like, oh my God, well, if this person thinks that I'm incompetent, then I got to worry about my image. So sometimes you're avoiding this conflict in fearing that, and I don't mean that they're going to go run around and tell everybody in the world. I mean for yourself, because if you're attaching your identity to a job or to a person or to an outcome, if you're attaching yourself to that, you're in your ego. So if you're avoiding conflict, you're afraid of them, I don't know, exposing your weaknesses. Well, if you can't embrace your weaknesses, you're never going to grow. But a lot of it can be manipulation and control. And quite honestly, that's one of the biggest pieces of it. Not just fear of rejection. It's fear of, well, if I say this, or if I don't say this, then maybe they'll see it my way. If I don't bring it up and I'm just quiet, maybe they'll ask me what's wrong. Again, you're not sitting in a corner necessarily planning this, but it's an undertone within your subconscious. And this is the next one. You'll see how 4, 5, and 6 all are married. And they're quite honestly, all 6 of them are married anyway. But number 6 is a perceived power dynamic. So highly emotional people, highly emotional, intelligent people, also know when to not address it in the first place. So there's a level, it's not avoidance. Listen, if you're walking around trying to address everything in your life, you're going to risk being that person who's complaining and trying to get everybody to do things your way. When you have high emotional intelligence, you go, okay, you try to pull back 10,000 feet and you say, okay, do I feel demonstration of past things historically? Does this person have the emotional maturity to have a conversation? And let's say you're like, no, let's say it's your mom. You're like, oh my God, every time I bring anything up, she like loses her shit. I don't want to bring it up. Yeah. So now you say, what do you want in your life? Do you want that person in your life? Don't fall in love with the fantasy because she's your mom. Do you want it in your life? Is that healthy for you? Don't even address it. You just keep it moving. So again, you have to be willing to look at it on the outside and say, is this worth addressing? I promise you not everything is. Just because you feel this way here and this way here and this way here, everything doesn't need to have a confrontation or conflict. But when it comes to the point of like, okay, this is problematic for me, and I mean really for me, not in a place of, oh, this is what I expect. I expect you out of me, or me out of you. Well, yeah, no. So when you're in that place, it's not avoidance. It's not addressing it by choice, not out of fear. And you will know the difference. Because if you're trying to avoid it because you don't feel like dealing with the bullshit that comes with it, you're never going to do the confrontation, ever. And it's going to lead to the things that I was discussing with you. It can definitely, and I see it so much, lead to resentments, built up resentments in relationships. Now, everything that person does, you're angry about. See, I knew that that's what they were going to do. Oh my God, they put the lid on the ketchup all wrong. Now everything's a problem because you've let all of these things build up. And then you're like, this person doesn't even give a shit. Yeah, because they don't even know what's wrong. And quite frankly, maybe you do bring it up and maybe they do not really change their behavior. Then you decide the level in which they play. And again, next week, we're going to talk about it in relationships. If you're holding on to a relationship for the fear of not having it, or, oh my God, we've been together for so long, what's my life going to be like without them? Then we know that that's attachment. But if you keep resisting confrontation because you keep fearing that negative outcome, it will build resentment. Not might, it will. Now, let me put that back on you. Let's say somebody wants to have a conversation with you. I don't know, it's an adult child, it's somebody close to you, and you just keep avoiding it because now you're avoiding the conflict of what they have to say. Well, guess what? It's going to breed resentment for them. And then when you get up in your feelings and say, well, I don't know, like that person just doesn't talk to me anymore. You think? Yeah. Because you're not even having a conversation with them except for on your terms. And like I was saying, there's a stagnation of personal growth because you miss out on opportunities. Because some confrontation isn't always about a negative thing. It's confronting the fact that you may need to walk into an interview head held high, knowing that you are perfectly capable. So this way you don't miss the opportunities versus the confrontation of like, what's my fear? Let me confront that. So the same way that you have a conflict that you have to confront with other people, you definitely have a conflict that you have to address within yourself. I'm afraid of this. Good, do that. You guys know I do exposure. You're afraid of snakes? Good. Let's go somewhere where there's snakes. Like, let's go to a reptile place. Oh, you're afraid of getting on a plane? Good. Let's create a plan. Let's do that. You're afraid of social? Good. We're going to do that. Me and you will do a session. You'll put me on FaceTime. You and I will go into a club. You and I will go in the middle of a mall somewhere. If you keep waiting and waiting and waiting to feel like it, you are not dealing with confrontation for yourself. So it's not just about other people that you're avoiding it. It's definitely within yourself. And what does that do? Now that almost breeds resentment for yourself because now you start judging your past and why am I stupid and why are we doing that? Okay? Because no one, and get clear in this, no one has ever bullied themselves into being a better person. Oh my God, you're a piece of shit. Oh my God, you got to do better. No one's ever bullied themselves into being a better person. Nobody. And that's psychologically proven. Science-based. No one bullies themselves into being a better person. It physically can't happen because your brain doesn't work that way. And like I said, the reduced creativity, because now you're living in that eggshell place. You're walking on eggshells because you're afraid of confrontation if you're creative and you do something and then somebody says, "Ooh, I don't know if I like that." And then instead of you saying, "Oh, okay, well, let's be open to it. Like, what do you need?" Again, that's still conflict. Conflict isn't always like, "Oh, I'm so mad at you and I'm so mad at you." Conflict can be dissonance, right? It causes cognitive dissonance as well. So when you're in dissonance, the actions and the words aren't aligning, that could be on you too. Again, the physical stress, there is physical stress. Your emotions can control the physical aspects. Headaches, anxiety attacks, right? We know, but physically, not getting a deep breath, headaches, stomach aches. Sometimes it can cause gastro issues all the way across the board. And you'll also have to understand that if you don't ask for clarity, right? This is called organizational reluctance, essentially, that's what it is. And it's talking to somebody and saying, "Hey, what is it?" Let's say it's work. "Hey, I saw that you gave me this and you want me to do it. I'm not really sure how you want me to do it. Like, can you clarify?" If you are resisting having a confrontation and a conversation with somebody about what your role is, then you're always going to take on more work. You're always going to do these things. And then you're going to get mad because you're like, "Oh my God, I'm taking on all this work." You're doing it to yourself. You are doing this to yourself. Stop blaming everyone. It's the boss. No, it isn't. It's you. Because you're not creating the boundary, because now you're afraid you're not going to have money. Now we go into a scarcity mindset. So going into a scarcity mindset is keeping you in a space. You don't deserve to be shit on by anybody. And if you're staying because you're in fear, you're never going to be able to get into a space to where you're growing from a personal perspective. And guess what that creates? Loss of respect. That's right. Your resistance to confrontation and conflict can create lack of respect for you, because now you may look inept, you may look inconsistent, and that's going to be hard for somebody to respect because you didn't ask for clarification. So now you're sort of like half-assing it over here because you don't want to deal with it, and you're afraid of losing this, or you're afraid of losing a person, you're afraid of the rejection, so you stay on that spin cycle. And that's why that worksheet's going to be really important on Patreon, because it's going to give you sort of some prompts on how to start this. But until you are willing to accept that there might be a negative outcome, that people may just literally never see it your way, they may get combative and they may not. But if you're sitting there and you're constantly in preparation of what you think it's going to be, it is going to become a problem for you. And it is going to breed resentment. Not might, it will. It absolutely will. And guess what will happen? This will deteriorate relationships across the board. Work-wise, personal-wise, self-wise. So I think you really have to ask yourself a few things, okay? What are some things, first of all, before you even know what it is that you're going to confront anyway, why do these things bother you? Okay, is it because you are trying to do things for validation? Is it because you legitimately feel as though you felt some kind of way? Feelings aren't facts, but you're still allowed how you feel. And you're allowed to converse that, but do not, this is very important, do not go into it with an expectation that they're going to have to see it my way and they're going to have to change. They don't have to do any of those things. And then you get to decide the role in which they play. See, they don't have the power unless you give it to them. You're thinking that your conflict is all in their hands. Like, oh my God, they hold the power. They hold the power. You're giving that power to them because you get to decide, am I staying here? Am I going to find a way out? Is this a relationship I want to foster anymore? Maybe not. But guess who's responsible for that? You are. Guess who's able to sit in that and say, I'm going to address this, and it is what it is. But be careful of addressing it with an expectation. Address it, use I statements, I statements. But if you're doing it because you're thinking, I want them to do it this way and I want them to do it that way, now we're going into expecting you out of people, and now that's a whole different topic. So the next time that you see something come up, and again, everything doesn't need to be addressed. Everything doesn't need to be addressed. So you look and you say, okay, what is really problematic? Not what's annoying, because you're going to be annoyed 95% of the day sometimes. You don't have to address all of that. But if it's super problematic for you, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and address it. Don't sit there and map it out and create a script. And oh my God, if they do, just say, hey, listen, the other day when we were, again, non-reactive, non-emotional. Hey, you know what? The other day, last week, when we were at dinner and you said blah, 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 whatever it was, I feel, not it made me feel, I felt, that's it. I felt as though there was like a backhanded thing in there, and that person could be like, oh, well, that's not how I meant it at all. And if you're like, well, that's how I took it. Okay, that's fine. Maybe they don't apologize and maybe they do it again, but it's not something that they mean. But then you have to say, okay, why is this bothering me? Because I don't like it. Okay, that's fine. But don't try to change them. Don't ever try to change another person. You want to talk about breed resentment, that will do it. If you change for someone, it's going to breed resentment. If they change for you, I promise you it's going to breed resentment. And now we have a whole different issue about this fear of conflict and fear of getting out of relationships. So they're all going to go hand in hand. And the relationship topic is next week. So I really want you to look and say, are there any things I need to confront? Maybe we don't confront something that happened 5 years ago. Maybe we just don't do that. Look in the recent and don't create problems. But as things come up and you find yourself getting reactive, take a breath. You don't have to address at that moment and say, okay, what is it? And you can write about this in your negative journal. What is it that bothers me about this? Because you may not confront it. You may have to confront yourself and be like, oh, it was an expectation. Well, no need to bring that up to them. Or it could legitimately be something that you have to bring up. Avoiding it is never going to help you. Avoiding anything is never going to help you. Avoiding the laundry, not going to help you. Avoiding the conversation with the ex, not going to help you. Right? Again, not everything needs to be something, but if it's there and it's looming and it's staring at you from the corner, you got to address it. Got to address it. So that's going to be your homework. And like I said, if you're on the Patreon, go over there, get the worksheet. And if you're not, that's perfectly fine. Go back, save this, and listen to it. And every time you resist it, come back and listen to this. Come back and listen to it. Because nothing's going to change until you change it. And you are 100% in control of that. Check it out.